Hi, and welcome to Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. For the first time in our show's history, we are bringing another atheist onto the show today. I'm really excited about it. We have a man named Troy Roberts. He's a neighbor to the north. Being from Wisconsin, I feel very kindred with Troy. He's from Canada, the socialist utopia, right outside of Toronto, or no, Niagara, I believe is where he said. And Today, we didn't really know exactly what to talk about. Just really wanted to get somebody onto the show to bring the opportunity for I guess, my viewpoints. And let me tell you a little bit about how I got in touch with Troy, because I love this story. I met him through my Facebook debates and conversations, and it turned into um, it turned into an opportunity for he and I to play off of each other and to increase our team debating competition. So actually, that's the goal today. I've realized is we're just going to gang up on Bob, and we're going to, the two of us mind warp him. No, but what happened with Troy is I had seen him making some fantastic arguments, and he's a very, very bright, very articulate man. And I invited him into a group that I'm part of called Good Reasons to Believe. And after I sent him this invite, it was, I'll never forget this. I got a message from him on Facebook saying, it's like I just discovered a new playground. In that moment, I knew that Troy and I were kindred spirits. It's something that he is a fellow devangelist, and actively so. And I'm just so excited to have him on. However, since we didn't know exactly what to talk about, we came upon the question that is asked to us quite a bit. Um, is it right to be an evangelist? Is that something that you can be proud of? So, with that in mind, and no further ado, I want to bring first Bob. Come on in. Say hi to the crowd.
Is it safe?
Okay.
Good to see you, Greg.
Good to see you too. I'm hoping that you stick around till the end of the show. And
We'll
Troy, welcome
try.
to the show. Troy, are you
So,
there?
yeah, nice to be here. Looking forward
Thank you.
to it.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for
So,
having me.
So Troy, when we invited you to be on the show, what was the first impression, first thought that you had go through your mind? I like to ask people that because we have so many people from different angles.
Oh, I couldn't even really be sure. I wasn't even quite sure what I was getting into. I haven't watched the show. I wasn't sure what was going to go on, but it's kind of what I do, having these discussions, atheism with believers, with other atheists, reason for believing or not believing. It's my passion. So it's something that I immediately jumped on, regardless of what it was going to be.
Once again, you and I kindred spirits in that respect. That's exactly the same thing that happened when I was first invited to be on Dr. Jones's show, The Place. So, um, well, I don't know how to start. Bob, I wanted to ask you. I know we've talked about this a little bit in the past. What are your thoughts on the question of devangelism, of evangelism? I know that you, being the unconventional pastor, have said that your faith is not something that you would find compelling to other people. Um, but Troy and I, we see things a little different. We see our argument as a compelling argument for a reason that people should not believe in a God, and that can cause damage to people in some ways. I'm not. I'm calling a spade here. There are people who get severely emotional when they lose their faith. It can be a hard
hmm
journey to go through. What are your thoughts on this? I wanted to discuss it.
Yeah, well, I have no problem with people feeling passionately about the what they find as compelling, that the idea that there is no God. But and also if somebody's faith is going to be for them when it crashes a radically horrible experience, I think that there are plenty of unhealthy dynamics involved in people of faith and as a part of their faith. And so it's unfortunate that perhaps the loss of their faith might be for them a somewhat of a traumatic experience. But if they're ever going to have a healthy faith, I would wonder if that's actually even a very necessary phase. But I certainly can't fault anybody for doing what they really genuinely feel is important. I also think that the openness to discussion is so important that people of faith and people without faith, we need to know how each other think. We need to find ways of discovering how to respect that by recognizing that by respecting it, I don't mean behaving nicely, but genuinely and authentically appreciating that another person who can be an intelligent human being and really see things a little differently. That kind of respect. And so, there's a sense in which I think that a healthy faith is actually helped by devangelizing that goes on around it. Absolutely.
Troy, what are your thoughts on that? Have you been accused of anything of that nature?
Sorry, what was it?
Have you been accused of or had people throw things at you? Like, why do you feel like you need to attack people's faith? It helps them. It gives them comfort. What kind of arguments have you come across? Things when people appeal to my faith helps me. So
the comfort thing, I think, is a pretty big thing. But for me, fairly important distinction is there's a difference between like evangelizing and having arguments and harassing people. So people who like genuinely don't want to talk about it and they just want to have their faith and go on with their daily life, I'm not, I might bring it up in conversation occasionally, but I'm not the one trick pony, as it were. I don't want to be annoying them with it, but anybody I find who can have that conversation or is willing to try and have that conversation, I admire that and I feel fully comfortable doing it with them and attempting to show them what I believe to be the side of truth, as it were. So in terms of comfort, I mean, from all the ex-believers that I've talked to, they do say it was typically a stressful journey, but in the end, they almost invariably say that they're happier now because the world seems to make more sense to them.
And you never went through that yourself, right? You said that you have always basically known that you were an atheist?
Yeah, it wasn't so much that I became an atheist one day as I discovered what an atheist was and realized that described me. Never been a believer.
That's interesting. I mean, I can't say that I was ever a believer, but Bob, I certainly was maybe a deist at some point. Bob, you were a very different story on that one, though, and you have, to an extent, lost some of the faith that you used to have. Isn't that right?
Well, depending on how you define it, yeah. I started out very generic as a believer in God, very young, at a very young age. I was 7 when I can recall distinctly sensing God's presence around me and loving that. But by the time I became 18, I actually turned towards fundamentalism and remained in that, I'd say, for about 7 years. And it did begin to fall apart on me. I was a pastor. It began falling apart on me, and I was holding it to myself, reserving judgment, but internally I knew it was all falling apart. And then within a few years, it just completely fell apart. I'd say it had fallen apart by 1982. I knew I could no longer be a fundamentalist. So I lost what I would say was the illusion of a certainty. But I found that to be, for me, a freedom that returned to that generic faith that was an inarticulate faith, a faith that didn't know what to believe, but had a sense of who to believe in. And so, yeah, for me, it was a freedom from that tangent that I now consider to be, very unhealthy. So I didn't have that. Now, there certainly were periods of confusion where I'm trying to figure out, well, is this right? Is that wrong? And then I don't know what is right. So there was the disorientation. But I don't think I ever went through a phase where I had doubts in the existence of God. I certainly entertain and understand the objections to it, and I think that many of those objections are very viable ideas, and that a lot of the so-called proofs for God just don't exist. They don't hold water. So my faith became one that was what I would call faith. It's not based upon.
But
Uh,
how did that
a,
feel when you went through that? I mean, was it something where you lost? Was it difficult, harmful, traumatic for you to go from that absolute certainty to have to it
Great
falling
relief,
away like that?
great relief, great relief. Now, of course, it meant that I was no longer going to. There are not very many people who are interested in a pastor who's not, not full of dogma and all that, and going to stand for the faith, particularly if he has some aspects of his faith that are traditional. But for me, it was just great relief. It's no longer had to maintain an illusion that was no longer even sticking together. What a great relief! Yeah.
So,
That is it sort of goes along quite well with what I would say. The sort of general "I have faith in a greater being" is not something that I can say I object to, because it doesn't really do a great deal of harm. It's the fundamentalism that really gets to me, and I mean we all know what I'm talking about there. The anti-contraception crowd, the anti-evolution crowd, that sort of thing that's based on a very, very rigid interpretation of that book. But the generalized "I believe in a greater power" is not something that I can say I can disagree with, because and by the same token I can't prove that it's not there, certainly.
Yeah. Well, my faith is actually even more than simply generic. It does have some specificity to it, but that specificity is one I can't hold to dogmatically. And I have no desire even to do so. But that comes from more from the idea that there are specifics, whatever they are, but I certainly can't claim to have some authoritative insight into them that ought to be in any manner compelling upon anyone else.
We've had conversations of that nature, and you've told me reasons for your faith, and I've explained to you why I don't find them compelling, and you've come back with
Right.
that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah,
that is
people
one
should know,
thing that
by
I
the way,
think.
that Troy and I have also had a few conversations in that group, Reasons to Believe, and I've always enjoyed your comments. I thought they were excellent, and in a sense, although I'm not a evangelist, I do, share with you the sense that that a fundamentalist approach to faith is not really good for the people who hold it, the people they influence. And although I certainly don't want to be mean spirited or to destroy people in any manner, I certainly don't mind the honest discussion that allows that sort of approach to it all to begin to crumble.
It's pretty much where I
So,
come into it as well, and just anybody who's willing to talk about it, I'll give them a shot. I do want to mention just briefly, in terms of, I say generalized faith. It's not quite what I mean. I realize that faith more often than not has its specifics, but the question that always rises in my mind is this idea of faith as to oversimplify, like just believe, right? I have faith in this. It's not based on anything real. It's not based on proof. It's not based on evidence. It's based on other things. And my question is always, well, why would you accept that when you don't accept it for so many other things? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, how do you decide what's true and what's not if it's not based on anything tangible in that way?
Right. Well, I don't decide. I mean, for example, maybe a similar analogy would be if you're a member of a jury and you're hearing testimony from people alleging that a particular event had occurred, and everybody's testimony differs in some of the particulars. You can come to the opinion as a juror that something happened. They all saw it, but none of them were all that great at observing it so that they could relate it back to you in a manner. So we may not be able to prove exactly what happened, but we can still feel quite confident that something along the lines of what is being alleged happened. And many times, in a jury, When a crime has been committed and there's all this testimony, there's no guarantee that the people who may have been witnesses to the crime actually observed it with clarity or whatever. And there's a sense in which, the experience that some people claim that they've had of God is no doubt radically filtered, so that I'm not looking for proof that would tell me, oh, and this is specifically what it is. And there's some of the specifics that I would have, believing that God is love. It would have more to do with my awareness of man's genuine need to be loved, to be loving, and the effect that this has on our natural well-being and development. It's just kind of coherently consistent with it. But is that compelling? Absolutely not. So if I'm going to believe in God, if that's the thing that I'm going to believe in, then I don't feel that it's that big of a leap for me to then believe that he's not this radically weirdo tyrant. But the essence of it, though, is my own personal experience of that presence and the need to. I don't have any compelling need to deny it. I don't have any compelling need to prove it to anyone else.
I want to get back a little bit to the initial question, because I want to point this one as much as possible, because it's something that I'd like to hit the discussion on harder. We just got a viewer comment. It says, if you look at evangelism from a generic sense, it means one who shares good news about anything. So why would anyone want to be a de-evangelist? And I'm going to take credit or precedent. I'm sorry, I'll take the flack for that one. I feel like I may have coined the term devangelist. I don't remember reading it anywhere. I hope that it catches on and I can gain my fame from that. But it's meant mainly tongue in cheek. It's not a absolute. I'm not sharing bad news with that.
No, but not at all. No.
It's because evangelist is a very religious terminology, so it's sort of the linguistic tool for a bit of a pun. So thank you, viewer, for the comment. But no, I still do, and I'm sure Bob and Troy can all agree that what we do, we believe that we are sharing good news. But the question that I wanted to point here, and I wanted to get both of your opinions on it, is I have been asked by my wife, my dad, my friend's mom, who's like another mom to me, and several other people who are very, very close to me, why I would want to deconvert people that aren't causing harm. And I think Troy made a good point when he said that it's the fundamentalists are the scary crowd. They're the ones that hurt things. But my wife she's Catholic, but she's not she's not Rick Santorum. So she's not hurting anything, and her faith helps her. Her mom is a breast cancer survivor, and during that time in her life, her faith was a lot for her. I mean, she prayed, and it gave her a sense of, or a feeling of control in an uncontrollable situation, comfort. It did a lot of good things for her, and I've not really been able to come up with a complete response to that question yet. What is your take on that? Is it wrong for us to do what we're doing, for trying to take away people's faith?
I would say that kind of has to go with how you're doing it. I would say that when I'm out having these conversations, it's not I have a goal, I'm going to deconvert these people, I'm going to pull them out of this nonsense. That's not what I'm thinking. The first thing that comes to my mind is that I want to have the conversation. And I feel that my side of the conversation is very compelling, and I feel I have very good reasons for that. So eventually, if I can give enough of those reasons solidly enough and over enough time, I can help people feel what I see to be the light of reason. But that's not my goal. It's not like I'm here to destroy your faith, and that's that. It's not where I'm coming from.
People who need hope in a moment of crisis, this isn't a good time to discuss, what one ought to actually have hope in. But in terms of harm, I don't think that the typical evangelical or fundamentalist really appreciates the harm that is done when they say simple things like, I was really pressed for time, and so I prayed to the Lord as I'm stopping in at the grocery store, and there was this wonderful parking spot right up front. Thank you, Jesus. And they're talking about all these tiny little favors that God is constantly doing for them. Little do they know that sitting in the audience is some woman who only a week ago was horribly raped, praying to God during this event far more sincerely than most Christians ever even thought about praying. And God didn't do her any little favors. How is this person going to feel, especially if they believe that God really helps this other person find parking spots and their new shoes at the mall? And yet this person is going through something as radically violating as that. And God turns a blind eye, no doubt, for their own good and in his own wisdom, knowing what he's doing. That, to me, does horrific harm to the well-being of a person's sense of self. And I understand and I appreciate the shallow intentions that the person sharing all this "thank you, Jesus" is talking about, but I don't think they appreciate the depth of the implications that it brings, and I really think that sense can be extremely harmful, because I bet you there are plenty of people who have actually gone so far as to commit suicide because of the dejected abandonment they feel when listening to some of these stories people tell about what God is doing for them.
I know homosexual Christian teens are some of the highest suicide rates as well.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah.
And that is fantastic. Wow, that was a powerful illustration of that.
A subtle thing that can do great damage. Yeah.
I don't know. The only response I've been able to come up with it is that in my book, faith as a way of knowing is harmful. And I think that Troy touched on that a little bit earlier as well, is that even somebody with as amorphous of a faith as you have, Bob, and I'm going to attack you a little bit here. So it's that, and this is actually, it plays, and we just got a viewer comment. I'm reading it as we go here, but even believers who are not fundamentalists typically believe, say, or even teach that the Bible is 100% true. We can't stop the damage that the harmful stories of the Bible do unless the majority of people begin to be honest about what the Bible is. I'm reminded of the quote commonly attributed to Einstein: "The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing." And thank you, viewer. That's a fantastic comment. And that's, I think, it plays into what I was about to say, is that faith, in appealing to faith in any situation, saying, I don't have a compelling reason that I can say to you that this is true, but I believe it to be true. This is something that I can't give a good reason why that you're going to go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I still believe it. That kind of reasoning can be applied to so many things.
It can be, but that's the responsibility of the person doing it. It's a sense of boundaries, but and it's not as if it's done willy-nilly either. But you began by saying something about how faith is knowing. No, faith is never knowing. Faith is faithing. Knowing is knowing. Science helps you know. Experimentation, verification, validation. These are ways of knowing. There are various ways of knowing. There's various kinds of knowing too. So I reject the notion that faith is a route to. It's certainly a route to possibilities, to imagination, to wonder, to hope, to a wide variety of other things. But when we overstate it, I think that's when faith becomes irresponsible. And so just because it's been often done irresponsible, I'm not about ready to say, well, let's throw the whole thing out. Although no doubt some people would be far better without it. I recently speaking to I don't want to mention the person's name, but a person going through some great difficulty. And part of the problem that they're going through has something to do with where the things that they are not yet doing that would work for them are things they can't do because their faith is part of their problem, and you can't say this to them. You just can't. They can't hear it. Even if you say it, they don't even hear it. They go, "Oh, I know what you're talking about, and it's right, yeah, because the Bible says." And they hear you as saying something completely different from what you just told them. But so faith is a quality of experience that is radically different from knowing.
I appreciate that you say that, but I mean, Troy, I'm sure you can attest to that. That's a minority opinion. Most people that
It
you run
definitely is.
into are, when they talk about their faith, what do they mean when they talk about faith?
Various things, but they're pretty solid about it in any case. Faith in what is always my first question.
Also, there's a thing, when I want to mention this earlier, when we're talking about the traumatic experience it can be for people who lose their faith. What, um, for people who don't have faith, they don't learn how to walk around life being so weak, so inadequate, that being to themselves or by themselves or on their own is such a horrible experience. But if having faith is going to make you a person who has no sense of adequacy to life, if you begin to question God, I don't, to me, that is a very unhealthy way of approaching faith. Then there's many who really pursue that. They really want to, I think, turn into such a unusable hyperbole, this idea that he must increase and I must decrease, and he is everything and I am nothing, and all that other stuff. It's great harm to ourselves, and it makes us weak people.
I've talked to any number of believers who said, like, if I stopped believing, I'd kill myself. That's been said to me on numerous occasions.
Or if you stop believing, or since you don't believe, you should just kill yourself. I've been told that I should kill myself, or I should be killed as well. Fun little comments we got from there. We just got a viewer comment here, and it plays into, Bob, what you were just talking about. It says, actually, there's two of them. I'm gonna read them in reverse because I think they're probably from the same person. It opens with, or the second one. The Bible says that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. And then it goes on. The Bible says that God's ways are higher than ours. So why would anyone be so arrogant as to second guess God, who sees the world from the perspective of its entire history and entire population all at once, when we can see the world only through a periscope?
I haven't talked to God that specifically lately, so I don't know that that I've ever confronted him arrogantly on that issue. Many times people who say that come from a standpoint where they think that because they believe in the Bible, or because they have these words that they trust in, that although God's ways are higher than our ways, supposedly, they don't really mean that, because they think they know God's ways. They don't include themselves in on that difference, and so when you mock what they believe, or when you put down what they believe, they think you're putting down God, because they can't tell the difference between what they think, what they believe, and who God really is. The inability to see that difference is often a problem.
I can't understand why I look at the Bible and don't immediately, believe it to be true. Someone quotes those verses at me from the Bible, and I go, okay, yeah, your book says that. I've seen many other books that say all kinds of things that I don't believe. The fool the fool says in his heart that there is no God, but first you're going to have to prove to me that there is a God before I look at your book.
Well, also, right. I'm not so sure that's what the Bible really says. It says the fool has said in his heart, no God. Is he saying no to God? Is he saying there is no God? The translation of that is highly suspect, but it's a great evangelistic point, I suppose.
arrogance is one of those terms that gets thrown out quite a bit in these conversations. Troy, have you been accused of being arrogant before? Do you think it's arrogant what we do?
I've certainly been accused of arrogance before, but in my case, it's not entirely unjustified. I sort of am. Um, but the whole idea that being an atheist is a standpoint of arrogance just doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
I don't really see how that's any more or less arrogant than believing in the first place.
It
And one
isn't
of my
at
favorite,
all. It's the same
one of my
thing.
favorite quotes is,
Yeah.
atheism is the arrogant belief that this entire trillion-star universe was not made specifically just for us. If you're looking for a position of arrogance, I'm not sure we have the handle on that one.
Right. I do. I tend to side a little bit more with Troy on that one, Bob, in saying that I agree. Yeah, it's not arrogant to be an atheist, but I'd actually go a little bit in reverse. I'd say that fundamentalism is a rather arrogant position overall, because of the assumptions of knowledge that it has. I mean, how much do you have to think of your own opinions before you can be so absolute on them?
Well, of course, perhaps I would define arrogance a little differently. Arrogance in the license to violate you with what they believe. I suppose, if a person feels rather certain about something, I mean, for example, what if you're in business and you're trying to do a deal with somebody and you get this gut feeling that you can't trust the person you're about ready to make a deal with? What if you really feel that way strongly? Well, then don't make the deal. But you need to be free to feel rather certain about things inside yourself. But the moment you begin violating others with it, there's a sense in which the arrogance is demonstrated by the lack of boundary that you fail to appreciate or understand. In the way, so that it's more a style than. So I don't even see that it's arrogant to believe or arrogant to not believe, but more the way you deal with it and how you deal with others. Yeah.
The way it's typically presented to me and said to me is that we have the arrogance to believe that we know everything, because how could you say there is no God unless you claim to know everything?
Yeah.
So that, of course, is a bit silly, I think, because I don't claim that I know everything. I quite the opposite. But I just don't knowing reason.
We got another viewer comment here. It says, the man without the Spirit of God cannot know God. Have you ever asked God's Spirit into your life? If not, then of course you don't know God. I don't know if that was directed at me or you, Troy, but go ahead.
Well, I can say I certainly haven't always been a believer, but I've had conversations with ex-believers who would get very, very angry at that statement. They tell me that they spent the first 30, whatever years of their lives desperately begging for some sense of God, and it just never came. They get very ticked off and insinuate they hadn't meant.
Yeah. Troy, you're breaking up. I wonder if you could turn your
that.
speaker down a bit. That may be fighting that. Couldn't quite hear what you said. Did you catch it?
I caught most of it, I think. But you're right. I mean, it's what I had heard was that there's a lot of believers or non-believers that tried and tried and tried to get belief in their life. They've prayed, they've asked every day. I mean, so many people have lost their faith or have tried so hard, and I have to say, I'm one of them. My life would have been easier.
Isn't that synthetic? It's so synthetic. It's so fake. You can't believe anything that you don't have a sense of having discovered its plausibility before you ever it's a kind of thing you discover, or it's something you find is there. All of the efforts to try to create faith always backfire and become excellent reasons for not believing. It just cannot be done. I mean, the whole, as I understand it, the whole psychology of belief, it is. I can't think of a better way to get somebody to not believe than to try to get them to believe. It doesn't work that way. It's not a healthy dynamic.
It's not how beliefs are formed. It's not how our brains work.
Right. Exactly.
And I want to say to the viewer, yes, I have. I have asked for, I forget exactly, asked for God's Spirit in my life. I've prayed. I went through catechism, the RCIA, or the Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults, through the Catholic Church. I've studied with Jehovah's Witnesses and with people from a huge variety of faith backgrounds. And, you know, it would have been easier for me. The reason that I am so confident in my atheism today is because I tried so hard to believe in God. I really, and it's not necessarily that I wanted to. I was curious. I was compelled to learn more. But yeah, I searched, and I spent the better part of 8 years really trying to force myself to believe something, and that's where the closest I came to was a deistic form of the God of the Gaps. And when I realized that's what it was, that it fell apart because of the foundation it wasn't on. But so it's not something that I've arrogantly walked in and said, no, I will refuse to believe in God. I have tried. I've asked, and it's not happened. And that's it makes me think of the scripture. It's was it ask or seek and you will find, ask and you will be answered, knock and the door will be opened, I think. And you know, I sought, I asked, and I knocked, and nothing ever happened. Which in so many more ways than I can articulate leads me to believe that there's not something on the other end of that question.
As someone who has literally never tried, I've never said a prayer in my life, I've never been a believer. I mean, that criticism could maybe hold true, but I do want to point out that I've not tried to believe in Allah. I've never tried to communicate with Thor, Vishnu, Krishna, Ra. I've never tried to have a leprechaun communicate with me. You know, if someone were to say to me, like, of course you don't believe in leprechauns, you've never tried to bring one to you. It's the same argument as far as I'm concerned.
That's a very good point. I generally use dragons and unicorns, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't see. By the way, I don't see those as the same argument because, you know, the non-belief in a magical concept that supposedly inhabits our dimensions is not the same thing as the belief of a being outside of these dimensions. I mean, it is.
Really is, because they're telling me that if I try, this being will come into my life in some sort of manifestation or some sort of way.
Yeah, no, they're trying to push your buttons, hoping that you'll go through some sort of weak psychological experience that you're going to, in your lack of critical thinking, make the conclusion that they're hoping you'll make, and I just see it as a ploy that is going to work the more intelligent. So I think it's much to your credit that it hasn't worked, to be honest with you.
But on the question then, so leprechauns, unicorns, dragons, those are things that are, mythically speaking, they have corporeal bodies to some extent. What about ghosts? Ghosts are things that you're not supposed to be able to see unless they want you to see them, to experience unless they want you to experience them. Do you believe in ghosts, Bob?
I have no idea. I mean, you know, I've never seen any. The closest thing I've ever seen to a ghost was when I was a little boy. I had a dog that was we had a family dog that had to be put away, and no one else was willing to do it. But I took the dog in. I was only like 8 years old, around there. I was the one who took the dog into the vet to have the dog put to sleep, and very sick. And it was about 3 days later, I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw the dog there in my room in front of me. You know, that's the closest I've ever seen of anything that I could even call a ghost, I suppose. And I see that more as my, my dealing with the loss of this dog that meant so much to us. Lassie. Beautiful collie, blind, but great to have that dog.
People tell me about experiences like that all the time, and they go, "Well, can you explain that?" And I realize that's not what you're doing, but They're so many different and contradictory and mutually exclusive experiences are presented to me as evidence that there's something, whatever that individual person believes in. And just as someone who sort of comes at it from the outside and sees all the different sides,
Right.
even if I can't explain it, it really still, it's not very compelling as far as I'm
What's
concerned.
the whole need to explain it? I mean, one thing is authentically true. I had that experience. I woke up and I look out there and there is Lassie, as it were. Was Lassie really there? What was really going on? I don't need an explanation. I had the experience. It's interesting. I can't pretend I didn't have the experience, but this need to explain it is, I find in that some sort of an ego. I have understood this experience, and I need you to be able to be convinced that my understanding of it is absolutely correct. On what basis can one possibly even do it? Why would even one want to do it? It strikes me as being insecure, or maybe insecure isn't the right word. Somehow, it just out of place with the way that we all develop our insight. I experienced that. What does it mean? I haven't got any idea. I'm pretty sure it was just my dealing with the loss of the pet.
I find that a lot of the time the response I get is it's pretty basic. They tell me about the experience and they know who I am and they go, "Oh, what? You don't believe me?" That's sort of the mindset they appear to be coming from. I obviously can't speak for what they're actually thinking, but that's the impression that I get, certainly.
Uh, if you don't believe them, you don't believe them, and you have no obligation to.
That's how I
And
see
now they're
it.
turning it into an ego, or I don't know, a king of the hill or something. I don't know what it is. It's a game of some
Won't
sort.
you say, or wouldn't you say that it matters to some extent? If, for example, when you had seen your dog, if that was not an artifact of your mind, if that really was your dog returning in some sort of spirit form, uh, isn't that a pretty significant event in human history? Isn't something like that a notable phenomenon worth documenting and studying in some way?
I
I don't know.
don't
The
think so.
scientist in me says that would be incredible. If
Yeah,
I were to walk downstairs and see my grandfather and be able to have a conversation with him, first
right.
assumption I'm going to make is that I've gone crazy. But if
Yeah.
that's persistent and other people can meet him too, well, that's something really significant from this point forward.
And as a scientist, you'd want to find first, is there anything about this that is testable? And I think you're going to run into the brick wall there.
I think personally, I was perhaps born a scientist, as it were, because not knowing how something works or whether something actually happened is just it's almost unthinkable to me. I have to investigate. Um, Even like in the absence of things that I could say test, like just the example of the grandfather sitting on the couch and talking to everybody. Even if I can't test anything there, but it's happening to me and it's happening to other people, and I'm clearly not hallucinating, and this is actually going on. Now I
Mhm.
got to figure out. I have to figure out what's going on. I'm asking him questions. I'm doing research in, any given spiritual discipline that I can possibly find, and seeing how well it matches up against the experience that I'm having. Like I have a very burning need to know how everything works, and I always have.
You can tell the difference between destructive boys and boys that are going to grow up and become scientists, or even girls. But with the boys, one way you can tell is that the destructive boys, all their toys are broken because they've damaged them. But the scientists, all their toys are taken apart because they're
They're
trying to
still
figure
broke.
out how they work.
There's a screwdriver next to the detritus.
Right next to the the toy box. I got to keep those tools there.
So, Troy, we have about 6 minutes left, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to bring up anything that you thought would be an interesting topic or something that you were hoping to bring up today. Do you have anything in mind that you wanted to get to the viewers?
Uh, Not in particular. I didn't really prepare anything. I think I've said my piece, as it were. The only thing something that occurred to me earlier in terms of the faith as a mechanism for believing anything is just it's my basic question is what is that based on, and how do you know that your faith is true, whereas someone else with a contradictory faith faith is not true. It's always occurred to me, and this is a personal observation of mine. Faith is a synonym in my mind for gullibility almost, and I realize that comes off fairly poorly, but I can't really deny how I think, because you have faith in this, and it's not based on anything. It's almost completely, it's made up out of nowhere, and people make up stories all the time about all kinds of things. So how, if you're not using evidence and investigation and logic and reason to determine what you believe, then how can you be at all confident that what you believe is true? And as I just mentioned, figuring out what's true and what's not is something that I hold very close to my heart, and it's literally unfathomable to me that anybody else would feel differently about that, although obviously people do.
I would agree with you that there's not a cause for being confident, but I would say that the difference between a healthy faith and a scientist is that the scientist comes up with hypotheses, things that they wonder if they might be true, but they are dealing with issues that are fortunately in the area of testable. There may be things that are or that are just not testable, and we can form hypotheses about them. We can't test them, and so therefore we can't know with any certainty. But we can still, it's still the hypothesis of it is a sense, maybe faith, a healthy faith, is more a form of an hypothesis that one reserves recognition. This is currently untestable. And so this is one reason why I think that a healthy faith is not as it's a little humbler.
The vast majority of the believers on the planet would disagree with you on that one, Bob.
They wouldn't. Yeah, you're right.
And that's another thing. As far as being a devangelist goes, I get accused quite a bit of pigeonholing, of saying that all believers are the same, and using, say, for example, saying, well, that a lot of people said, well, that I personally don't believe that, therefore that's not an accurate representation of anybody in any way. And I love, Bob, having you here to show that perfect case study, is that most of what we talk about that categorizes the average believer does not apply to you in any way. Do you feel that takes away from the conversation in the first place, or is it fair to still bring up these things that a large amount of people do believe and the way that they believe them, and to discuss that for its own?
I think it's necessary
value.
to bring it up. Absolutely necessary to bring it up. Yeah.
I'm always very careful not to pigeonhole, because I've said a couple times, and a lot of believers actually agree with me, is that there are as many sects of Christianity as there are Christians. It seems like you all have had your own individual schisms some days. It'd
always be interesting. There's a website. It's the Belief-O-Matic. It's fantastic. I have directed several people to that. It gives you a series of, I think it's 30 or 40 questions that helps you to describe what you believe and find what groups or sects actually would apply to you the best. And it's interesting because I did it. It came out as atheist or secular humanist, and that was pretty accurate on my end. But I've seen a lot of people who have taken it and been very surprised by the results. It's a quick Google search, Belief-O-Matic. I recommend it to the viewers to just, it's interesting. I'm not saying that if you take it, you need to start going to that church, but it's certainly a foray into finding kindred spirits, if nothing else. And speaking of kindred spirits, we have about a minute left. And I just wanted to say thank you very much, Troy, for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I've had a good time. Hope to do it again someday.
Absolutely. I'm hoping actually at some point to put together sort of a panel discussion type of show and bring up an issue and have people represented. And in that case, I'm going to sit back and just moderate and let other people talk. So you'll probably be the one that I invite on to represent myself. So I've seen our arguments are similar enough. Well, thank you again for having us, Bob. Thank you for joining us again. Good luck with your show in a few minutes. Remember, viewers, Bob is coming up next, The Unconventional Pastor. And we will be back next week at 6 o'clock for Inspiring Honesty. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.